Going to start with dismantling the front output housing. Here I am popping the nut off of the flange. Impact gun really helps out here. Should have probably used a screwdriver to hold the flange so you don't pull a finger off. Got the nylock nut and pop the flange out. Inside we have a spacer and a felt washer. Felt washer we'll be replacing, spacer we can keep. Remove the high-low switch using a crowfoot wrench here. And the two switches for the diff lock. This is a 2004 case, so there are two of them, whereas the previous years will have one switch and the other one will have a ball bearing. Pulling off the diff lock selector housing. It's 3 bolts, and there's going to be 2 O-rings in this assembly. One on the outer side and one on the inner switch mechanism. Remove the high-low housing. This has a bracket on top as well. 6 bolts. The neutral warning switch. This cover plate can be stuck on pretty good, so I recommend a plastic chisel and just tap it out. To remove the diff lock selector shaft, we'll need to pull the spring so that we can pull out the little clips that hold the shaft in place. There's one on each side. Just compress the spring and pull it out. Finally, we can start pulling the bolts off of the output housing. They're all the same bolts except for that one right there, which is a longer shoulder bolt. With all those bolts taken care of, we can work the housing off of the main casing. It should just pop off pretty easily. Here's the diff lock selector shaft. Using a screwdriver, we can work the shaft out. Try not to mar things too much. And got the shaft, the fork, the spring, and the two circlips. There are some measurements in the Rave manual that'll specify some tolerances for these components. We'll check later. Here's the dog clutch for the differential lock. I found a ball bearing and I don't know where it came from. I'll have to figure that out. Now it's time to remove the differential from the main casing. We have to pull out this spring and ball bearing from the high-low selector shaft in order to pull the unit out as a complete assembly. I'm using a magnetic screwdriver here, a bigger one. You can hopefully pull that ball bearing out. There we go. Moving on to the rear flange, this time I'm using a screwdriver. Pop that nut off pretty easily with the impact gun. And like the front, we have steel spacer and a felt washer in there. I'll be replacing both the flanges. One had some pretty good rust in it, and they're cheap enough. Now we're taking a look at the output, the rear output housing. There are 3 studs there on the right side. I want to remember where those came from. There's the back of my head. There's also a shoulder bolt there at the top, which is the one immediately left to the upper stud. And then there are 2 shorter bolts on the left side. the shoulder bolt here, top. Goes in, shoulder. With those bolts gone, we can gently pry the housing from the main casing. And there's the rear housing. Both the front and rear housings have some ball bearings that we'll be replacing as well. Now I'm tapping the high-low shaft out with a brass punch there, just to get it started, because we want to be able to pull out the differential pretty easily. Now we can pull out the differential and the high-low shaft and fork. Just wiggle that guy out of there. See, the fork there sits on the selector sleeve, which will engage or disengage the high gear. To get the intermediate gear out, we'll have to take off the bottom plate. There are two studs there, as shown, and then the rest of the bolts are the same. This plate can be pretty stuck on this casing. The intermediate gear cluster is held in by a stake nut, so I'm trying to punch out the stake. And it didn't go so well, and I ended up stripping some of the threads off of that shaft. Thankfully the shaft is pretty cheap in and of itself. It's about 25 bucks, so I'll be replacing the shaft. Tap the shaft out with a copper hammer. Copper is softer than the shaft, so it won't damage. And switching to a punch here just to tap it the rest of the way. Then with the input gear, actually no, the input gear is still there. We can, with the differential removed, we can just put our hand in there and pull the cluster out. Oh, there goes a ball bearing. There are two taper roller ball bearings on each side that are held in loosely. Because we're fitting a new high gear to this unit, we're actually replacing this entire gear cluster and bearings. The rear cover plate for the input gear, you'll want to mark where it came from so you can put it back exactly where it was. Here I'm noticing that the FTC markings are readable from this side. And there are two pieces to this thing, so you want to keep them together. With that cover plate removed, we can now pull out the input gear. And that completes the basic teardown of the case.